All right. What is up, everybody? Isaac here, Civil Engineering Academy. I've got my boy with me. He's watching some YouTube, so sorry if you got some background noise going on. It just is what it is, so it's going to have to deal with it. But excited to be with you today on a podcast episode I think all of us go through. That's kind of the science of procrastination. Can't even say it right. So a lot of us procrastinate everything we do in life. It's human nature to procrastinate exams or deadlines or anything else we got going on. So we wanted to talk about that and really how you can overcome procrastination in your life, so you can finally get over the hump of passing your FE or PE exam or any other exam you're challenged with. So I'm going to bring my brother Mark on. We're going to talk all things procrastination and how you can finally overcome that and get after it. And we'll be right back in a minute. See you there. All right. What's up, Mark? We're rocking and rolling.
Hey, it's always a good time. You're inviting me back. So I'm always excited to come on with you. It's always a good time.
I got Sam here, my boy, as a guest, so apologize for any background noise, but it is what it is today. So we're gonna roll with it.
Yeah, he'll behave. He'll behave. It'll be all right.
Well, thanks for joining me. This is going to be a good one as we talk about procrastination. We all kind of go through that in our life. It's kind of a trap that all of us face as a human being, but do you have any good stories or things that you've procrastinated in your own life?
Oh, yes, I do. So the first one that comes to mind, Isaac, is I had a design assist opportunity, right? So I was looking at presenting to a developer and his design team on a major resort project that we were, wanting to get in and help with the design. A lot of times we can get in on these design assist opportunities where we as a contractor can go in and help them like streamline the design, right? And make sure it's the most efficient design possible. And so what that requires is a lot of prep, right? You got to dig into the project, understand what their needs are. We usually do a little prep work by developing maybe a couple little Revit models on how we think the structure would be most efficiently designed. And we get ready, right, for this big presentation. Well, I procrastinated, and I want to blame it a lot on, my workload. I had a lot of other things going on, but if I'm being honest with myself, I procrastinated doing my homework on this project, right? So I was supposed to be preparing, probably I should have been preparing a couple days before this preparation, right? Reading up on the needs of the design and the needs of the owner, and coming up with good ideas that I could present, right? And good solutions that I could present. Well, my team had all of their material prepared. They went through and developed the Revit models on what we thought an efficient design would be. But man, when I showed up for the presentation, I was in charge of doing the presentation, but I wasn't prepared because I had procrastinated. And I thought I could just crunch, a couple hours before and still do a good job. And I kind of fell on my face. I mean, I was leaning on my team quite a bit. I was constantly looking over to them and asking them questions about the project, and I wasn't on my game. And the job actually went to a competing firm. I regret to say, because I wasn't prepared, because I had procrastinated. And I thought I could just crunch it all in maybe a couple hours before my presentation, and it didn't work. So, yeah, it's a bad thing. Sometimes, I think.
Well, that's actually a great
in my
story.
case, and with that. Yeah, with that story, though, my procrastination, I think, originated probably from, I don't know, a little bit of hubris there, thinking I could just step in and do it really quick, I think procrastination comes from that as well. It's not necessarily a fear of failure, or maybe you're. It's probably more of the valuing short term comfort over long term reward. Maybe that's the motivation behind what happened to me on that one. But
That's That's a great story. I know a lot of us like cram for exams. We postpone stuff. We procrastinate a paper in school. We just do. And usually when there's a deadline or something, that's usually when we know we have to get after it. But yeah, that's a great story. I know there's some psychology to procrastinating in terms of why we procrastinate. And in fact, a lot of people may think that laziness is part of that, but really, it's about emotion and regulation of those emotions. I know there some of the psychological concepts that maybe touch base on this is that we sometimes have a temporal discount that we do. So we value short term comfort over long term rewards. What do you think about
yeah,
that
so
one?
that's the one you could probably nail down for what went wrong with me, right? In my story, I was valuing my short term comfort. I didn't want to spend the time up front or apply enough, I guess, hours to researching the project and understanding it as well as I should have, because, maybe I wanted to knock off early and go home. I was valuing my short term comfort over my long term reward. So I,
Great
yeah,
analogy.
I think, I think that's where I fell short.
That was a good one. Another one that usually goes along with kind of this stuff is like the fear of failure. A lot of us want to avoid stuff. There's an avoidance or a defensive mechanism that we all kind of go through. And some people just don't want to do it because they have a fear of it until the last second. And then let's try to knock it out. But they kind of fell anyway because you waited so long. So you've seen that ever before where people have this avoidance to doing things?
Yeah, I've had that uh, in my own professional career. So there's there's been certain tasks that I haven't been particularly fond of doing, and there's I don't know. There's usually things that are dealing with contracts. I don't like doing contracts and negotiating contracts. It can get kind of burdensome. And sometimes I'll have a fear that a contract is going to be more difficult to negotiate than it actually turns out being. So if I just jump in and just get after it, it actually turns out to not be as bad as what I imagined. So I I want to avoid that situation as a defense mechanism. But when I just apply myself and jump into it, it usually turns out to be not as bad as I was imagining.
Yeah, it's usually the case. I, I got Sam bouncing in and out here. The guy is trying to potty train, and sometimes the fear of failure happens with that too. So,
Yeah,
um,
yep.
it happens.
That's a good one. Yeah.
uh, we're doing our best here.
So,
Another one is task aversion. So sometimes people are just completely overwhelmed, and so they do other stuff. They're scrolling on their phones forever. They're watching YouTube videos forever. They just want to avoid the task at all costs. The room stays messy. We don't want to get to it. I'm guilty of some of this stuff too, but like, what's your thoughts on task aversion?
yeah, I'm guilty of that myself. There's something innate in all of us about being overwhelmed, and our knee jerk reaction is to just, I don't know, you're trying to avoid having to do anything at all. I don't know if the thought, I guess our instinct there is that maybe the problem will just go away, if we ignore it. Usually doesn't, but I've felt that as well, the overwhelming type feeling where you're just trying to avoid doing something because you've got so many other things on your plate that it's just like, oh man, I can't get to that. As a manager, sometimes I have the luxury of being able to delegate that to somebody else, right? But a lot of times, if I've ever felt overwhelmed with the number of tasks that I've got out in front of me, um, that is a natural kind of thing to do is procrastinate, and you just don't want to get to it.
And I think that's applicable to anyone taking the FE or PE. We all procrastinate because we feel so overwhelmed. I mean, if you look at any reference manual, there's a ton of material in there, and you're going to have to know a little bit of all of that. And it gets a little overwhelming. And so we'll talk about some strategies to defeat all that, but it definitely is an issue. So task conversion is another one. Another one is perfectionism. So basically, if somebody can't do it perfect, they don't want to do it at all. Why don't you touch on that one?
Yeah, I can think of like projects around the house that I procrastinate because I kind of list in my mind everything that's required to do the job correctly, and because that list is long, at least in my head, I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that. Like, for example, I had we have some grow boxes, some flower boxes outside of a couple of windows on the front of my house, and they weren't anchored down very well. And I knew I was going to have to go in and put in some new drop in expansion anchors with some all thread and do a good job of fixing my grow boxes so they were mounted to the side of my house a lot better. And I procrastinated that job for so long because I knew it was going to take like a long time. It was going to take the whole day to like hammer drill out the wall and put measure everything and put the drop in anchors in there and anchor everything properly. It was going to take me so long that I just kept kicking the can down the road. I didn't want to do it. Eventually I got to it and I got it done right. And the grow boxes are great, but just because I was thinking, oh, man, I got to do this right. It's got to be perfect. It put me on this path of procrastination with that task. So
Yeah, I mean, we all have projects like that. So good job finishing that one. I think also with procrastination, we do face a lot of different pressures, and those pressures can be like external pressures. So maybe your wife wanted you to get that job done. I don't know. But there's also internal pressures that we face as well. So if you're preparing for an exam, some of those external pressures that people feel, are your boss. It could be the job requirements. There's a lot of things outside of, just around your workplace that you're feeling pressure to. And then, internal pressures could be just trying to prove yourself that you can do this, and have the motivation to do that. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on having these external versus internal pressures? Is one better than the other? Are both just always there? What's the deal there?
I think they're both there, especially if you have any kind of relationships, which we all do. Maybe we're a spouse, we're a parent, we're a son or a daughter. I mean, just having relationships, there's expectations within those relationships, right? And that's where those external pressures come from. Those are all real. I think the internal pressures are probably maybe the most important for motivating, right? Proving it to yourself, wanting to be maybe an inspiration to your family or others that you love, that you value a relationship. I think, that's kind of an internal thing that comes from maybe your character. But I think that internal thing has to be there because external pressures, people can just fold under those, I think, unless you have the internal pressures that are offsetting that and being able to, having that desire to prove things, wanting to inspire others. I think that's more of a valuable type pressure as you're trying to get over procrastination. That's my opinion.
No, I think you're spot on there. And I think people can crumble when there's too much external pressure, but what's holding you up is the internal kind of self confidence that you can do this and that you're putting your best foot forward. So, there's probably a ton of tools to help overcome procrastination. I kind of want to hit on a couple of them. So, some of the top tools to help you overcome this stuff is, if you have a huge task, obviously the easiest way is to break it up into smaller chunks. So, how would you do that with studying your FE or PE exam?
Well, when I do it, or when I did it, it was it was looking at the comprehensive scope of everything that I had to study and looking at how I could break that up, dividing it up into subcategories, and then of course applying those subcategories to certain durations of time that I thought it would take to study those subcategories, and then figuring out how much time I needed to study, and then just allocating appropriate time in my schedule to cover those durations that I needed for study time. And so, looking at the thing all at once as this big bite that you've got to bite off and try to digest is just, man, it's gonna for sure you're gonna want to procrastinate that, and you're setting yourself up for failure. But if you can look at the thing at the 30,000-foot view, you go, okay, this is what I got to cover, and then break it down into those subcategories, and then further break it down into the actual time that you're going to need to study those subcategories based on the volume of material that's there, right? You can you can figure out how much time like each day you need to apply to your study and break it down. And then it's just, okay, I got an hour of study time today. I got to get through that. And I know exactly what I'm studying. And then boom, you go to the next day. If it's an hour you've got that day, you be consistent with it and you just bite it off one little nibble at a time. And then it's not so overwhelming. So that's the way I approached it.
Well, I got a question for you. I'm curious what advice you would give to somebody. I received an email from someone who is looking to take their FE exam, but they've been out of school, let's say, since 2004. So the question I would ask you is, what advice would you give to someone that's put off the exam that long? And is it worth it to still do? Or is it not? Is it passed by?
Yeah, no, I think it's still worth it. But the big piece of advice I would give is make sure that you're allocating a little more time to those background subjects, right? So the stuff that you learned in school that, were the prerequisites, right? So let's say in your curriculum that you've got to study for the FE, for example, you got to study a bunch of the statics or you got to get into dynamics. Well, if you don't have a basis or an understanding of trigonometry, for example, and you recognize, my trig, I'm a little rusty on that, then you need to allocate more time for those prerequisite type subjects, which are, the math is probably the biggest prerequisite subject that you need to go back and look at. But just make sure you're allocating a little bit more time, and it's okay. I mean, you've been out of school for a little bit, and you got to brush up on some of those prerequisite subjects, and just make sure you're just allocating a little more time in your study. Maybe instead of 3 months before the test, you're one of those guys that's going to need, or one of those people that they're going to need 4 months, because you've got some prerequisite stuff that you've got to go through before you get into the meat, of your subject. So that would be the main thing I would
Right.
suggest. Just give yourself some more time. Yeah.
Good tips there. I think, one of the tools that also helps us overcome procrastination is having accountability, which could be a course or a person, a buddy, a community. So, I would also recommend to him to find that, whether it's through a course or someone to help him on that journey. Another tip for avoiding or overcoming procrastination is also to study actively, meaning that instead of just watching YouTube videos, you're actually putting pencil to paper and solving problems. So, could you touch on that? Like, how important is that knowing, like, we helped a brother that struggled a little bit with his FE. Like, how important is it to study
Yeah.
actively?
You know what? That it is like, apart from like getting yourself organized and figuring out how much time you need to study each of your subjects or your sub subjects for your test prep, I would say that is the most important thing you can do. Absolutely, hands down. There's something about grinding through problems, pencil and paper, that I don't know, it gets that concept in your head a lot better than just sitting there and watching passively. If you're watching something passively, and some people are smart enough to get a lot out of passive learning like that, but the best way to get it in your head and get it ingrained and get the retention there is to actively solve problems on your own. It just is. There's something about that physical action of putting pencil to paper and drawing your own diagrams, figuring out, where all your loads are, if you're doing the statics problems or whatever, figuring out your own moment diagrams, moment shear diagrams, whatever the problem is. There's just something mentally about that helps ingrain that into your head. It's like, I don't know, taken apart, if you're a mechanic and you like to take things apart, and our dad was a mechanic, right? And I remember hearing stories about him trying to train people to understand how to take apart, like, I don't know, an air conditioning system, right? And they would have a little bit of class instruction, but where the rubber hit the road and where everybody's finally started getting a hang of what was actually going on was when they had their hands on the nuts and the bolts, and they're actually disassembling things and putting it back together. That's when it clicked. Boop. And I think most people are wired that way. If there's a physical element to what you're learning, it helps create a wrinkle in your brain that helps with retention. So
Very true. We got Sam back in the picture. Yeah, those are
nice.
great tips on overcoming procrastination. I think another tip is like, um, it's it's kind of been labeled a 5 minute rule, but it's just to start small and build momentum. It kind of ties into studying actively too. Start small, start solving smaller problems before you get into complicated stuff. And I think that's going to help you with momentum, and you'll get there. Um, yeah. Any thoughts on that? The
Yeah,
other
that
tools that we can utilize are, visualizing the consequences that we may have by not passing. And there's some tools to help us with that too. But any thoughts on those two?
just yeah, it's you just have to recognize that procrastination, it's a normal innate response that we all have. It's just finding out how you're wired, your thought process, and just being able to, I think, counteract that. Are you Are you more susceptible to external pressures because maybe you're not, internally motivated to do some things, So maybe your best course of action is to divide things up like we talked about. But there's just you've got to understand how you react to a task, what your thought processes are, and understand that procrastination it increases the chance of failure, and you just got to be able to carve up the task at hand. However, you're able to do that, to meet your needs. And just figure out a way that you can be consistent. I think that's the key. You just got to figure out a way to divide things up, put it in smaller digestible chunks, and then just be consistent about knocking things out one at a time. Doing those problems, writing things down, getting those wrinkles in your brain, right? So that retention is there.
I love it.
And then starting out with some things that once you see some success, right, with the stuff that you start out with, it builds confidence, and you go from there, building one step at a time, building on the confidence that you've established
Well,
with
let's hit
being
on a
successful up
couple other
front.
things. Sorry, I'm letting you finish your thought. But
No, I'm
yeah,
good.
I totally agree with everything you said. So I think, as we wrap this up, if somebody has failed the exam, or you have failed, or maybe in the future you kind of face this, procrastination does typically increase after failure. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's just that discouragement. It's that fear of failing again. I think it's happened to you once, and man, it's going to happen again. And so it's the fear of failure is what I think it is that causes the procrastination.
That makes sense. So I think an important lesson there is that we need to reframe failure as kind of feedback, instead of, getting it down on us and we stop pushing forward. So make sure you're reframing that in our lives. Um, I've noticed at Civil Engineering Academy, people that find us and you take our courses are usually multiple repeat taker people, and they come reaching out to us because they have failed a couple times, and they've even tried other courses, and they're just kind of looking for something else to help them move this thing forward. So take every failure as a lesson. Keep moving forward, and I think that's how you can beat procrastination that settles in after failure. So Mark, any thoughts to kind of wrap up procrastination? I feel like it's normal, but it's beatable. But anything you want to cap on to procrastination?
It's normal. It's beatable. The key, like I say, is just find something that lets you be consistent with your study, with your nibbling away at the task at hand. You just got to figure out a way to be consistent with that, and then you can overcome it.
Perfect. Yeah, and if anybody needs help out there that's listening to this, definitely check us out, civilengineeringacademy.com. Check out our courses for FE or PE. Sam, you got anything else to add? No, he's good. He's learning how to potty train everybody. So if you're watching this on video, that's what's going on in my world. But anyway, it's all good. Anyway, Mark, thanks for joining me on this edition talking about procrastination. It's all good. And don't procrastinate taking your exam. Get out there and do it.
See ya.